Yeah, Justin, thanks for having me, man. Hey, my name is Don Ross. I am the founder and creator of an organization called Manhood Tribes. Manhood Tribes is all about creating groups of manly men who follow Jesus at every stage of life. So it is, dedicated to creating men in a group context and to helping really kind of build up community around men. We do a lot of different things. Lately, I've kind of been focused on dads with sons and really kind of helping men who are looking to usher their sons into manhood and kind of, what that looks like. Yeah. Yeah. I'm out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and been here for about the 5 or 6 years. Um, Actually moved here to take a job at a church. I've been in the ministry background for the past, probably 20 years or so, and have kind of bounced around the country doing stuff with that. Yeah, nice. So at the moment, working. I took a break from the church world a couple years ago to actually get a job in digital marketing to kind of try to learn some about this whole internet world and how to be able to do it well, and to help me with launching Manhood Tribes as kind of an online men's organization. And so working on that. So not currently at a church employment wise, and so trying to work on this and marketing at the same time. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question, man. We could do a whole podcast just on that. I love that question. Yeah, it's digital marketing is really just about how do if you're speaking strictly in the business sense, how do you reach your customers online? Is really kind of what we're talking about there. So, in the business world, we're talking about things like your website. We're talking about what marketers call SEO, or really kind of like how do people find you if they're searching on Google. We're talking about paid ads on places like Google and Facebook and all your social media channels, whether that's Facebook or TikTok or YouTube or whatever, email marketing, there's all kinds of stuff that fall under the big umbrella of digital marketing. But it's really just about, how do you create a presence for your organization and help your customers find you somewhere on the internet. But I think, what I think I really love about the idea of digital marketing, especially as it relates to ministry, is really figuring out like how do you help people who are already online find answers that they're looking to for spiritual types of questions. And the challenge there is that people don't necessarily come to the internet with spiritual questions on their mind. Some do. There's plenty of Google searches that would justify that. But more often than not, people have questions in their mind that are spiritual related, but they're not necessarily looking for them while they're online. And so, as a church or as a ministry, it's figuring out how do we kind of interrupt people's otherwise online habits with some things that might scratch their itch spiritually, and then be able to kind of reach and engage them on something that they are interested in, but just didn't know that they were really looking for that at the moment. And I think this topic that we're talking about today is actually a really good one related to that. How to help your son become a man. I think that's a big issue that a lot of parents and a lot of dads in particular are really thinking a lot about with their sons in our day and age, but they're not necessarily like jumping on Google and and asking that question. Hey Google, how do I help my son become a man? That's not really what we're typing in, where you're trying to find out like what's the cheapest pizza in my neighborhood, but it is a question, whether it's top of mind or not. It is a question. And so digital marketing is really kind of about like, okay, if people are thinking about that, how do I help get the content that can answer their question in front of them, wherever they are. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So those are great questions, and I think honestly, like I can give you some hunches, but I would say if you want to get out of hunch territory, the internet has some pretty good tools to help you with that. There are actually some really good tools to help with typing in, what are people actually searching for, and kind of figuring out like what are the things that people are asking about, what are kind of some of the top questions, and you can even drill down into like, hey, in a a theme about like spirituality or manhood or whatever, like what kind of questions are people asking. You can even kind of use Google for that. Honestly, if you just want to pull up a Google page and start typing in some things in a search bar, Google will start, kind of filling in the blanks for you with things that people search related to those terms. So there's some good ways to do that. But right now, I would say, honestly, man, at kind of a bigger level and a deeper level in terms of some things that might be related to some of what we're talking about today. I think around the whole area of manhood and masculinity, there's all kinds of questions. And it's just, there's just a lack of clarity in our Western culture at the moment around what is masculinity. Is masculinity even a good thing? Should we have men in our society? It's just, there's all kinds of just, confusion and questions. And, some of that I think comes from a very aggressive agenda in our culture about masculinity. But a lot of it, I think, comes from, I would say even an even bigger amount comes from just a place where uh, our culture is really kind of at a place of identity crisis, of really trying to kind of figure out who we are. And that applies in many ways to gender, certainly not in the only way, but it is applying there. So I think there's just a lot of questions for men in our culture to say, okay, like what does it mean to be a man, and how do I matter or count as a man? So I think all of those things are top of mind and relevant. I think too, just this is even bigger, kind of broader issue, but as we're recording right now, the war is beginning to rage in Israel and Palestine and all that's going on there. I think a lot of people are just curious at a spiritual level about, you can call it the end times or the end of the world or whatever. But people, anytime anything happens in Israel, the level of spiritual curiosity goes up in our culture. And I think honestly that's a good thing. Honestly, obviously stuff that's happening in Israel right now are moral atrocities, but the fact that it does kind of awaken a spiritual curiosity in our culture is something that, from a marketing standpoint, you can kind of take advantage of, to be able to say, hey, this is going to cause people to ask questions. And what if we can get out in front of some of those questions with some content that would help point them towards, whether or not we're directly, or ultimately pointing towards Jesus, we can at least start with some questions that address issues of spirituality and what do we think about death and what do we think about religion and what do we think about some of these bigger issues. All of those are possibilities, things that are going on in our world right now. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's honestly, I think it's at the moment, I think it's too big of a question to start there. Okay, so what I would say is that before answering the question, what is biblical masculinity, we actually just kind of have to back up, and say, what is masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? So, I would say, and I think this relates to just kind of this whole issue of how to help your son become a man. I think there's really kind of three main keys to helping your son become a man, and which is super crucial right now because our sons more than anything are really in this place of like, what does it mean to be a man, and is that even relevant? Like, they've got kind of some like primal urges that are pushing them towards developing into manhood, but not a lot of cultural markers that are helping them get there. And so I think that being able to answer that question, that kind of first question of what is a man or what does it mean to be a man, we got to get that in check first in order to then be able to say, okay, so what does it look like to biblically be a man? What does godly masculinity look like? We've gotten so out of whack in our culture that we've forgotten even what manhood looks like. So figuring out what godly manhood, we need to deal with that one second. But so, for me, I try to really put it in terms of something just really, really simple. So, if you think about just history and culture in general, 50% of the world's population over the course of history has advanced into manhood with little to no problems. It's only kind of in our recent cultural moment that we've really kind of struggled with this. And it shouldn't be that complicated, right? It should be something that happens fairly naturally as we have seen throughout history. And so that's where I have really tried to take it in terms of creating kind of a definition there, not around roles or things that you should do, because I think those things do change from time to time and throughout different cultures around history. But I have looked at it in terms of just kind of some basic traits. So I call these the 5 marks of manhood. And I say that these are the things that really kind of throughout history, throughout most cultures, you would see these things kind of in a cluster around what it meant to be a man in just about any context. And those things are strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance. And again, it's kind of in a cluster that you see those things around men. It doesn't mean that women can't have those traits as well. It's just that those things tended to, when you put them together as a group, that tended to be what really defined manhood in most places. So for men, it was necessary to be strong in order to offer manhood to their culture. Women could be strong also, but it wasn't necessary for women to be strong to offer womanhood to their culture. So that's kind of the idea. So you look at those different things and you kind of start to get a sense of this is what it means to be a man. This is how men need to live that out. But that doesn't necessarily tell you what it means to be a good man. And that's really been different in many places, in many histories, many cultures. What it means to be a good man changes significantly. And so that's where we have to start asking, okay, well, so what does godly masculinity look like according to the Bible? And I think if you look at those 5 marks of manhood, where we start to really figure that out is in the last 2, is in honor and allegiance. So I would define those things. Honor is really kind of about doing right by your peers. So in our society today, we talk about honor as if it's more kind of we use it in ways that it's probably more like what we call integrity. Being a man of honor kind of means being a stand-up man, having good moral character, those sorts of things. But for the most part, and throughout the way the word has been used through most of history and still in a lot of cultures today, it has more to do with doing right by a group of people around you, kind of earning the esteem and honor of the people that you fill your life with. And so the key there really is well, who are you choosing to have honor with? Who are those people and what are they like? There's that expression that, there's even honor among thieves. And I think that's kind of the idea there that communicates hey, even bad guys can have honor. They're just they're choosing to honor things that aren't what we would call morally good. They're just saying that, hey, you can earn prestige in our little bubble of a culture by stealing from others, by, not sticking to your word, all those kinds of things. So, as a Christian, we would call those things not honorable. But if you're hanging with a group of people that thinks those things are awesome, then you still can have a lot of honor, even though you're living, what we would call morally bad. So, being a godly man, I think, means choosing to be around other men who are holding up and honoring the principles of Scripture, are trying to live a life the way that Jesus would live it if he were living it today. That we're looking at the things he does, the things he taught, and just trying to say, okay, this is how I want to live. This is how I want to treat my neighbors. This is how I want to serve people. This is how I think about women. All those things really come from the teachings of Scripture. And I think if we're living around men and in a tight-knit community with other men who are honoring those things, then we're doing pretty well. So that's honor. The other one would be allegiance. And, if honor is really kind of about your peer or horizontal relationships, allegiance is about your vertical relationships. And so, obviously, ultimately, we're talking about an allegiance to God here. And so being able to say, hey, biblical masculinity is about recognizing that Jesus is our king, and we've got to put him first place in everything, that my whole life needs to be submitted to him. And if there's any part of my life that's not submitted to him, then I've got I've got my allegiance out of whack somewhere, so my idea of biblical masculinity is kind of incomplete there, because I'm saying there's someone or something else that's more deserving of my allegiance than Jesus is. And that's less than the picture of what we want for biblical masculinity. So yeah, I think honor and allegiance, if we can get those things defined around Jesus and around Scripture, then the rest of manhood kind of sorts itself out. It really isn't all that hard after that. But yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's that's great. So it's really good, and I think that actually kind of helps me jump into kind of the second thing there. If the first of the three things is that you've got to give your son a clear picture of what it means to be a man, the second of those things is that you've got to give him opportunities to practice being a man. So what I would do with my sons, we do two things that I think are really helpful, and they kind of build off of those 5 marks of manhood. So um, in our family, we love movie nights. We do the heck out of a Friday night movie night. Get some pizza, watch a good movie. It's one of our just like kind of favorite rituals. But what we have built into that is to say, okay, let's take this movie and let's look at the key characters in the story. Especially I've got two sons, so we especially kind of look at the male characters in the story. And I'll say, okay, I want you guys to think about, where do you see these 5 marks of manhood being lived out in these characters? And after the movie's over, we're going to talk about it. We don't only spend, we might spend 5 minutes talking about it, but it's enough that we'll kind of be able to start picking some of those things out and being able to see, oh yeah, well, Batman was a cool character. He was really strong and really courageous, but he didn't have a ton of honor because he was kind of a loner. There wasn't really like a whole lot of honor that he was living by there. Or it just, we'll be able to kind of jump into themes like that and start talking about like what makes them a man, or what makes them, unmanly, or, even some of those themes where we talked about, okay, well, so what made them a good man? Is Jack Sparrow a good man, even though he's kind of the hero of the Pirates of the Caribbean story? Like, how does that work? And so, we get to kind of talk about those things in that way. And those make for really, really good conversations, and it makes, kind of like you're saying, it makes those 5 marks of manhood be really kind of concrete in their minds, because they start to associate it with, characters that they love and stories that they really enjoy. And then it's easy to track and follow. So movie nights is one of the things that we do. The other thing that I've tried to put in place that we do sometimes are what I call manhood challenges. And so we will just create some opportunity. Like I said, your son needs opportunities to practice being a man. And the reason for I start including this is because, in our culture, some of those things used to just kind of happen naturally. When we had things like shop class and PE, that were regular things that all guys did in school growing up. Even, like, heaven forbid today that our boys would have to have an actual conversation with a girl. It's just kind of like, text messaging just kind of like short circuits the whole process. But all of those things were kind of, if not full on like rites of passage, they were just ways that young boys had to kind of learn how to survive as a man, how to kind of get ready for being an adult in our society. And we just don't have a lot of those anymore. Now it's kind of like the biggest challenge that they face is like conquering the next level on their newest Xbox game, or, whatever. Um, so those things aren't really accomplishing what it means to be a man. And so I had to really say, okay, well, what am I going to do to challenge my boys? Because in this stage of life, they need challenging. They need some opportunities to really be able to say, yeah, I can face the things in front of me and overcome them. So for these manhood challenges, we just take one of those marks of manhood at a time, and we'll say, let's come up with something that we can do that's going to push us to get better in that particular mark of manhood. So for a strength challenge, we might say, hey, we want to get better at the monkey bars. Then we know that if we can get better at that, it's going to help us get stronger. So, we'll go like find some monkey bars on a playground or whatever, and just say, let's see what we can do, today, and figure out kind of where we're starting from. And then over the course of the month, we might go, once or twice a week back to the playground, to the monkey bars, and keep practicing at it, see how much better we can get. And then by the end of the month, we'll kind of retest, just see what we've done. How much better have we gotten? Helps my boys kind of see like, hey, I can get stronger with a little bit of effort, like this is a real thing. So we'll do something like that. Or, a skill challenge might be as simple as like, let's learn to change a flat tire. Just a skill that they don't have. Maybe they don't get to practice as often. They haven't learned yet, and nobody else is going to teach them if I don't, as their dad. So, things like that. And that you can come up with different challenges for every one of the marks of manhood, just finding ways to challenge your son to accomplish something that's maybe just like a little bit out of reach for him, not something that's like so impossible that he's never going to accomplish this month, but something that's just going to push him a little bit where he can start to really see, yeah, if I put in some effort, this thing that is out of reach right now is accomplishable. And that's a core element of learning to be a man, is to say, yeah, this challenge right now is bigger than me, but if I can tackle it, like I can get there. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually I can get there. And that kind of like that sense of, I have what it takes to overcome these challenges is really what a young man is craving. So I think that's really important. Yeah. It's, man, it's so fun too. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And any of those things. Yeah. Yeah, there's 3. Yeah, so, we got a clear vision of what it means to be a man, opportunities to practice being a man, and then the third one is a dedicated season to advance from boyhood to manhood. So, this is what most people are, kind of now calling a rite of passage, and it's gained a lot of popularity probably in the past decade, especially in Christian parenting circles, and I think that's a great thing. Our culture has kind of lost track of sort of what's really been an ancient art, for and kind of just a norm in most societies for doing some kind of rite of passage. But the ways that we have adopted it have kind of been, almost like I would call it faux ceremonial. It's a little bit of kind of like we're just going to have this one real special gathering and say a bunch of cool things and, like tap you on the shoulder with some swords and hey, you're a man, and hey, look, I'm all for that kind of a ceremony. I do think that's really valuable. But that in and of itself is not going to be enough to actually usher your son into young manhood. And so that's where you got to have those first two things in place because he needs to be challenged and tested and having an idea of what it is that he's headed towards. But then the rite of passage program really has to kind of accomplish some things over the course of a time. It's not meant to be just a one time thing, but really a season where he begins to see that he is a man because he's being validated by other men in his life. He's being challenged, he's being tested, he's learning about what it means to be a man, and he's got other men who he knows are men who are beginning to say, hey, we recognize you as a man as well, and we're inviting you into our community. That's really how manhood gets passed on, is by other men who are already established as men inviting these young boys up into the community of manhood. And that's what a rite of passage is really meant to accomplish, right? It's a passage. You're moving from one thing to the next, and that's what's really needed there. And it takes more than a simple ceremony to accomplish that in the heart of a young man. And that's really what we're after, is that he comes out on the other side of that rite of passage, knowing and believing I am a man. I'm a young man at this point. I got a lot of growing still to do, but I am a man, and I'm accepted by other men as that. So yeah, so I actually with my boys, I actually created a rite of passage program that I call First Tribe, and it really is all about doing those things. It's about teaching the things that they need to know to become young men. So we kind of tackle some big questions about life, about who am I, who is God, what am I meant for, do I have what it takes, all these kind of like big gut level questions about what it means to be a man, and developing some key answers to those questions that they can learn and know and be able to live out of. But then we do a lot of fun things too. We do movie nights, we do manhood challenges, we have some ceremonies and some big activities and lots of fun, and it's great. But we did it over the course of about 9 months with a group of other dads and sons, and it was a phenomenal experience for both of my boys, and one that as a dad I wouldn't trade for anything. It was one of the sweetest experiences I had with both of my boys. And yeah, I'm so glad for that season in their lives. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. There's something at a heart level that I think all, boys, as they're trying to move into manhood, that they are craving that. And that's just, that's the way God has designed us as men. Like, that's part of the way that he's built us. So there's always going to be kind of a craving and a hunger for that, but it's becoming harder and harder for boys in our culture to be able to give voice to that longing, to be able to say, I don't know what this feeling is, because none of the young men around them are pushing towards that either. They're all looking around at each other and saying, "Well, what's he doing?" And I want to be like him. And that mostly means, texting and social media and video games. And like, that's not going to develop a man. Those things aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with them, but in and of themselves, they are insufficient for developing men. And so that's where, as dads, we really have to kind of step into that place and say, not just that, hey, I'm going to push you into this, but really that I'm inviting you into it. They need to see it as something that they already want. And as a dad, you're saying, hey, your time has come. Like, you're ready for this, and I want to invite you up into it. And sometimes that works well as a dad doing it. I find that more often than not, it works best by having a group of men who are doing it, because every son is going to respond differently to their dad than they are to other men. And seeing how other men can have an impact on my son's life that's different than what I do as a dad, but in some ways, like, not, I wouldn't say better, but it is supplemental in some really like critical ways. It's different in some ways that I can't accomplish as a dad because of all the, baggage that comes with just being dad and, being rule enforcer and everything else. But other men who don't have to carry that same weight that I do with my son, being able to speak into their lives and encourage them and build them up and invite them into something manly and significant, had a profound effect on their lives. And so that's, we call it First Tribe. And it's because it really is meant to be a first kind of tribal experience, a group of men for your son. And we do it, I kind of say it's really for about like middle school age, when I think that most of this is happening for young men, kind of in that like 11 to 15 age range, when they're beginning to kind of hit that place where they're ready to take those steps. But to do that with a group of their peers who are going through some of the same stuff, and a group of other older men who are inviting them up into it, is a powerful experience. It really is very cool. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a dad with a middle school son and you're interested in something like First Tribe, you can go to myfirsttribe.com. Check it out. If you want to purchase it, you can do it right there. If you don't have a middle school age son and you're just kind of interested in some of the themes that we're talking about, you can still go to that website. And there's an email sequence that you can sign up for there that'll give you some of the things that we've talked about here today and expound on it a little more, but also get you connected to all the stuff that we do at Manhood Tribes, and help you find out more about that. So myfirsttribe.com, easiest place to start. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so I would say, if you've never done it before, guys, you need to create for yourself a manhood challenge. So use one of those 5 marks of manhood that I talked about: strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance. And just ask yourself, hey, which of those do I need to get better in? Which one of those am I struggling in the most? That's not, most guys are pretty in touch with that question. No, you could say off the bat, like, I know I'm lacking in one of these areas. And then just design a manhood challenge for yourself, something that you would be a challenge for you. Like, you can't go out and accomplish it tonight, but that, like, you could, take it on and push yourself and get it done within a month, and set yourself a goal. tell a friend, a buddy about it so that they're holding you accountable to it. And yeah, try to accomplish that challenge within a month. It's been fantastic. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Justin, been great to be with you. Thanks for having me.